All right, our passage today is Genesis chapter 1, the whole thing. Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 through the whole thing. And you will find that in the first page of your Bible that looks like a Bible page. Genesis chapter 1. The word flourishing is a little bit overexposed these days. There's a lot of people throwing that term around, flourish, flourish, flourish. But it's a really good word, and we need to not be scared off by how overexposed it is. We just need to enjoy it for what it is and to embrace it for what it is. The Oxford American Dictionary defines to flourish like this: to grow or develop in a healthy and vigorous way, especially as the result of a particularly favorable environment. Now, I know that starting a sermon by reading the dictionary is not like an awesome hook. You know, it's not really the way to get you super engaged. But I love this definition of flourishing, and I love what it says, because all of us want to grow. All of us want to do what the dictionary called be vigorous. We all want to thrive. I don't know hardly anyone who says, come this time next year, I would like to be a little regressed. I would just like, this time next year, I hope I'm not as mature. I hope I'm not as emotionally stable. I hope I'm not as healthy. I hope I haven't really grown, but maybe I've just taken a couple of steps backwards because I've come so far that maybe I'm getting out ahead of myself, getting over my skis a little bit. We all want to flourish. And what the word acknowledges is that flourishing is at least partly, not entirely, but at least partly dependent on our environment. It's not just dependent on our desires. It's not enough just to want to flourish. The environment also has to be conducive to it. It is to develop in a healthy and vigorous way, especially as the result of a particularly favorable environment. Now, if ever we should know that, it's after this last year, because think of the upheaval of environments we've lived through for the last year. About a year ago, a virus named after a beach beer was unleashed in the world. It was unleashed in the world. It began to spread, and at first we heard news about it, and then a few weeks later, our day in, day out environment had been reduced. Like most of us used to have a normal day that went like this. We woke up in our homes, and then we left our homes for some part of the day, and then we came back to our homes at the end of the day. We lived kind of out in the world, and home was the place we came back to. And then our whole physical environment got shrunk to home. You wake up at home, you work at home, you go to school at home, you eat lunch at home, you work out at home, you watch TV, you watch movies now at home, you go to church at home, you have fellowship group at home. And as our physical environment was shrinking, our relational environment shrank as well. Now you only see members of your own household. How many of you looked at your roommates last year and thought, if I'd known that like my whole social world was going to be confined to you, I would have thought this out better, right? And then as all that was happening, our political environment got worse, which was hard for it to do, but it did it. It got worse last year. So our physical environment got worse, our health environment got worse, our relational environment got shrunk down, our political environment got more fragmented and hostile. Is it any wonder that maybe we're not flourishing and thriving? This year, as a church, we're asking, how do we rebuild the structures and the environment that make for flourishing? We're taking a big step toward that next week. We're saying one of the structures, one of the rhythms that makes for flourishing is to have a regular week in, week out rhythm. In fact, we'll see that God made it this way today, where we stop and we enjoy Him. And that's harder to do when you have to do everything else at home, so it's helpful to have a space that we come and we do that every week, and so we're rebuilding that space right now. Today's sermon is about flourishing. It's also about creation. It's about God's creation of the world. Now, let me tell you how those two things got paired up together. All year long, as Michael told you in his welcome, all year long we are using the New City Catechism as a jumping off point for our sermons. Now, a catechism is a series of questions and answers that tries to summarize the big themes of the Bible. So each week we're taking one question of the catechism and then we're looking at one part of the Bible that answers that question. It's actually the place from which that we know to ask that question, and we're just learning the structure of the whole Bible this way. We're learning the whole structure of the Christian faith. So last week we did question number 4. Question number 4 says, how and why did God create us? And it answers like this: God created us, male and female, in His own image to know Him, love Him, live with Him, and glorify Him. And it's right that we who were created by God should live to His glory. We looked at the part of Genesis 1 that describes His creation of the first man and woman. Now today we're going to question number 5, and it asks this: what else did God create? What else did God create? And to answer that question, we're going to look at the whole chapter of Genesis chapter 1. It describes what else God created and why else God created everything else. Now, when we come to Genesis chapter 1, most of us as modern people come with some questions and some curiosities. And the two that I hear most often are this: what about evolution? That's the first one. What about evolution? Does Genesis 1 fit with evolution? Can it be made compatible with it, or does it contradict it? So I hear that question a lot. And the second question that sometimes Christians ask is, does Genesis 1 teach us anything about like how old the earth is? Like scientifically it appears to be, very, very, very old, but Genesis 1 says it was created in just 7 days. And so can we derive something about how old the earth is from Genesis chapter 1? And really for a long time, Christians have kind of debated those questions. And today it can be a pretty intense debate among Christians. Like people can go like, if you believe a certain thing or a certain thing, you can't be a Christian, right? But actually, when these questions first emerge, you should maybe be encouraged by this. When these questions first emerged, Christians who all had like a very high view of Scripture, it's God's Word, it's true, it's reliable, they would debate these things, and it would be a fairly friendly debate. I actually want to encourage us to embrace that. And I want to suggest today that there's a better starting point for understanding Genesis 1 than bringing these questions that we modern people have. And here's a better starting point. In fact, everyone would probably agree about this when they think about it. When you read a text, any kind of text, the place you have to start is with this question: what is the original author trying to say? If you're reading a text of the Bible, if you're reading a legal document, if you're reading the Constitution, if you are reading a novel, the best place to start is to ask, what was the original author trying to say? When you read, when you put yourself in the shoes of a reader, you probably bring your own experiences and your own curiosities and your own questions with you. That's what it means to be a person. But to be a reader is to set those aside for a minute and to simply engage the author on their own terms and first understand what they're trying to say before you go, now here's all my questions. And we need to do that especially with Genesis chapter 1. And we read it that way. Just knowing that this was written thousands of years ago, you know that the original author was not trying to answer our questions about evolution or the age of the earth. That wasn't their concern. So I want us to ask, what is their concern? What are they trying to say? Now, this passage is a little bit mysterious for this reason. It's not totally clear what kind of literature we're dealing with here. Some have speculated this is a poem because it seems to have rhythm and structure and repetition to it, as you'll see. And yet it actually doesn't follow the conventions of Hebrew poetry. There's not rhyme to it. There's not parallelism. So it's not really a poem. And then some have said, well, it's historic narrative. It's describing a historic process. Genesis 2 does seem like historic narrative, but Genesis 1, as you'll see, there's structure, there's rhythm, there's repetition. It's not just written exactly like historic narrative either. One Hebrew scholar, John Collins, called it exalted prose narrative, by which he meant it's stylized. The author has clearly arranged it to make a point. Now, I think this is even more helpful. It's also written in the language of visual appearance, which just means this. It's describing the world as it appears to us. So it's narrating things as they appear to us, and especially as they would have appeared to ancient people. For example, it does not call the sun a star, even though like we know it's a star, and it does not call the moon a moon, even though we know it's a moon. It calls the sun and the moon two great lights. Why is that? Because when you look up at the sky, it appears, language of visual appearance, it appears there are two great lights hanging in the sky. It appears that one of them is brighter than the other. So it calls one of them the greater light and one the lesser light. Now, that's a clue as to how we should be reading this passage. The author of this passage is asking this question: what is the appearance of the world from our perspective down here? When we look out and when we look up, what is that trying to teach us and say to us? Just the way things look from ground level. What's it trying to teach us and what's it trying to say to us? There's a message in the way the world appears. There's a message in the way you experience the world. So when the sun comes up each morning, what conclusions should you draw from that? And when you feel the seasons change, this spring, as you feel right now, the day is getting longer, what message should you draw from that? What meaning should you make out of that? And it has something to do with flourishing. So let's read it together, and the way we'll read this is we'll just read a section at a time, and I'll just stop and kind of narrate what's happening. And we'll read another section, I'll just narrate what's happening. And we're going to learn what the world means by the way it appears. So here's how it begins. Genesis chapter 1, beginning in verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Now, these first two verses are describing action or events that take place before the main storyline begins. The main story is going to begin in verse 3, and this is a way Hebrew writers would set up the story by going, now here's what took place before our story begins. And what took place before our story begins is that God created the heavens, which we would call the cosmos, and He created the earth, our planet. And this is the key. After this first act of creation, the earth was watery. Did you notice that? The Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. The earth was watery. And it was without form and void. So it did not have the structure that we see today. It did not have sky above and earth below. It didn't have sun and moon, two great lights hanging in the sky. It didn't even have day and night. It was without form. It didn't have structure, and it was void. It was empty. Now, remember how flourishing happens. Flourishing happens when life can grow because the environment is particularly hospitable to life. And so the point here is that before the story begins, earth exists, but it does not have the form, it does not have the structure that is hospitable to life, and so it's empty. We've been exploring the planet Mars for years now. We've discovered a planet that's inhospitable to life. It has no water. The average temperature on Mars is 80 degrees below freezing, and it's 95% carbon dioxide. So it's like if you took the worst traits of the Sahara Desert and North Dakota and global warming, and you put them all together. That's Mars. It's inhospitable. The Earth did not have a form that was hospitable to life, and so it was void of life. Watch what happens next. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. The first structure God introduces to this earth is he creates this rhythm of day and night. He introduces light, and he separates light from darkness. And he says there's going to be a period of time where the earth is light, and there's going to be a period of time where the earth is dark. And this is going to alternate, and we're going to call it day, and we're going to call it night. So he's forming this formless earth. Keep reading, verse 6. And God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters. Let it separate the waters from the waters." And God made the expanse that separated the waters that were under the expanse from the waters that were above the expanse. And it was so. And God called the expanse heaven. And there was evening, and there was morning, the second day. Now remember, this is the language of visual appearance. So here's how ancient people thought. Here's how the world appeared. It still appears this way to you too. When you look up, what color is the sky? It's blue. And when you get in your Subaru and take your surfboard to California and you see the ocean, what color is the ocean? It's blue. So ancient people thought when you look up, it's water up there. It also sometimes leaks. You notice that? Sometimes water comes down from up there. So there's water up there. And the earth is made of water too. There's water out here. So there's waters above. And there's waters below. And Genesis 1 said, yeah, God formed it that way. And he put this expanse between the waters. So there's waters above the expanse. There's waters below the expanse. And there's this big expanse between them. Call this expanse heaven, the heavens. So God has created this rhythm of day and night. He's given this earth the structure of day and night, light and darkness. He's created this expanse. Now there's space. There's water up there. There's water down here. There's space where things could maybe one day move. Verse 9. And God said, "Let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas. And God saw that it was good. So now God structures it some more. He gathers the waters together under the heavens in one place, and in the dry land, we would call it continents, they called it earth. The dry land appears. So now we have day and we have night, we have light and we have darkness. We have water above and water below, and the water below has been gathered together and confined to certain limits so some dry land can appear. So we're starting to have a structure, we're starting to have a form, we're starting to have an environment that's going to support life. So watch what happens next. Verse 11. God said, "Let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit, in which is their seed, each according to its kind on the earth." And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed according to their own kinds, and trees bearing fruit, in which is their seed, each according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the third day. Now life starts to grow. So we've gone from without form and empty to formed, shaped, filled with life. We've gone from inhospitable environment to hospitable environment, and life is starting to grow. Look at verse 14. And God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night. Let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. And let them be lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light upon the earth. And it was so. And God made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. And God set them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good, and there was evening and there was morning, the fourth day. The structure of day and night already exists, and we would have to interpolate that God was maintaining that structure by his own presence and will, but now he creates two great lights that are going to govern, they're going to rule over the day and the night. So he wants there to be light during the day, so he creates a great light, and then he still wants there to be some light at night so you don't run into a telephone pole. So he creates a lesser light so that even when it's dark, there's still a little bit of light. And these two lights govern, they create this order of day and night. They also create years and seasons. So sometimes the greater light is going to shine for longer periods of time on the earth, and that will be a season of growth and flourishing and color and explosion. And sometimes it's going to kind of not shine quite as much, and it's going to be a season of cold and rest and replenishment. He says they're for seasons, they're also for signs. They're supposed to signify something. They're supposed to point to something beyond themselves. Like maybe with the sun, God is trying to signify his presence, the brightness of his presence, the life-givingness of his own presence. And maybe with the moon, the lesser light, he's trying to say that even in the darkest times, my presence is still available to you. So now we have gone from without form and void to formed and filled, and we've been filled with plants, and now we've been filled with these lights that govern the day and the night and the times and the seasons and signify and point us to the presence of God. Let's pick up in verse 20. God said, let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the heavens. So God created the great sea creatures, and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarm according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply and fill the waters of the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth. And there was evening and there was morning, the fifth day. And God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures, each according to their kinds, livestock and creeping things, and beasts of the earth, each according to their kinds. And it was so. And God made the beast of the earth according to their kinds, and the livestock according to their kinds, and everything that creeps on the ground according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. This earth, which used to be without form and void, now has a form, it has an environment, it has a structure that is hospitable to life, and it's filled with life, it's bursting with life. It is what the dictionary called a particularly favorable environment. Have you ever watched a couple getting ready to welcome a new baby into their family? In the months leading up to the baby's arrival, they're painting and fixing up the baby's nursery. They're buying diapers. They're buying clothes. They're buying little things that bounce the baby. They're buying strollers. They're filling the baby's room with cribs and little plush toys. They're learning how to burp the baby, how to hold the baby. They're studying, they're going to classes. They're getting ready, and then they bring the baby home. And she doesn't go, oh, this is incredible. How did you know that pink was my favorite color and plush bunny was my favorite kind of animal and milk was my favorite food? How did you know? She doesn't know any of that. She just comes into that environment, which they had pre-created for this baby girl, and she flourishes in that environment. I think that's how we should understand what happens next. Verse 26, then God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female he created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over every living thing that moves on the earth. God took a formless, void earth and he shaped it and formed it into a place that is hospitable to life, and he then ordained that it begin bursting with life, that it begin flourishing, and then he gave it to the man and the woman. So that they could flourish too. And they're now going to take what God made, and they're going to form it some more and shape it some more, and they're going to fill it some more. They're going to imitate him. The Hebrew scholar, the writer Albert Wolters, in his book Creation Regained, he described it like this. He said, the earth has been completely unformed and empty. The earth had been completely unformed and empty. In the 6-day process of development, God had formed and filled it, but not completely. People must now carry on the work of development. By being fruitful, they must fill it even more. By subduing it, they must form it even more. Mankind, as God's representatives on earth, carry on where God left off. And we learned last week, when they do that, they also flourish, they grow, they thrive, they become more glorious, they become more and more a reflection of God's glory as they take this wonderful environment that he had formed and filled and made flourish, and they form it and fill it and make it flourish more. They imitate their Creator. Here's a question. Maybe you personally have experienced this. Maybe you've observed it in someone else. Have you ever noticed someone who becomes, let's just say, a better person? Or maybe you might say more mature, or to use this language of the Bible, more glorious, as they work. As they work, something about the process of work develops them and shapes them and forms them and chisels off their rough edges and causes them to grow. That's why one of the greatest things you can do is have a job. Like, I had a job for a season of life that I would have been like, this is not a job that fits me. This is not what I'm made to do. And you know what I learned? You know what happened to me as a result of having to go to that job day in, day out? Sometimes without going home at night. I learned how to deal with people. I learned how to solve problems. I learned how to work hard to accomplish tasks. I learned how to train and develop people. I learned the structures of how business functions and doesn't function, what makes for financial health and financial unhealth. I picked up all of this as a result of working. Maybe you can now look at your own life and see that. Some of you are raising a baby, and you're not like, this is what I was made to do. This is laborious. This is long days and short nights. But you are being shaped. You're being formed. You are having rough edges sanded off. You're learning things. In the process, God uses the process of us forming and filling to grow us and to mature us. Verse 29. And God said, see, behold, look, I've given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the heavens, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. God shaped and formed the world as an environment that is particularly hospitable to flourishing, and he did it so he could give it to us. Now, the story actually ends in the first 3 verses of chapter 2, so just let's get the end. Thus the heavens and earth were finished, and all the host of them, and on the seventh day God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all his work that he had done in creation. And the word rested there doesn't so much mean got tired and had to take a break. It means more stopped and enjoyed what he had done. God shaped and formed the earth into an environment that is particularly hospitable to flourishing. He gave it to man and woman so they could flourish. He created it for them, and then he rests and enjoys what he's done. So, what else did God create? That was our question today. What else did God create? And here's the answer. God created all things by his powerful word, and all his creation was very good. Everything flourished under his loving rule. Now, this helps us understand why God created the world, but this is even more helpful to us who follow Jesus, because this helps us understand what Christianity or what Jesus called the gospel is all about. In fact, this first creation story was not just kind of written in a vacuum. It was written to God's people, Israel. God had called them to be his covenant people, and he wanted to set the story of what he was doing in Israel. He wanted to set it in the context of why he created the earth to begin with. And the fulfillment of Israel's story is Jesus, who we worship. So, as Christians, we read this as our own story. God sets our story as followers of Jesus in the context of what he was doing when he created the world. If you're not a follower of Jesus, he invites you into that story. He says, if you will become a follower of Jesus, if you will put your life under Jesus, your whole life now will be set within the context of what I was doing way back at the beginning when I created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and then I began to take hold of it, and I began to form it and make it an environment hospitable to life, and then I filled it so it could flourish, and I gave it to you. Your life will be lived in that story if you put your life under Jesus. So let's just take a few minutes and tease that out. In Genesis chapter 2, we zoom in on the creation of the man and the woman. And I believe the best way to understand Genesis chapter 2 is it's like zooming in on the second half of day 6. So if day 6 gets summarized in Genesis 1, like God said, let us make man in our own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. He said, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, have dominion. Genesis 2 gives us a more detailed look at how that story took place. And Genesis 2 He puts them in a garden to work it and to keep it. And he says, you are free to eat from any tree in the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. He names one tree in the garden, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and he says, of that tree you shall not eat of it, for in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. And that tree represented something else about the structure of this world that God wove into the structure of the world so that it could flourish. And that thing is this: God wove his own presence into the structure of the world. And he's telling them, you're made to flourish when you also live by my word. So the tree of the knowledge of good and evil represented the ability to seize the knowledge of good and evil independent of God. Or as Proverbs chapter 3 will say later, trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him and he will make your paths straight. That's just a restatement of you shall not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. In other words, you will not flourish if you lean on your own internal intuition about what is good and what is evil. You'll only flourish if you lean on me to tell you what is good and evil from outside yourself. You are not yet developed enough. You have not yet grown enough in order to have the capacity on your own, independent of me, to distinguish between what is good and evil. So your thoughts aren't always reliable. Your emotions aren't always reliable. Your body isn't always reliable. You need to lean on me, and if you do, you'll flourish. And that's as much a part of the structure of the world as the sun and the moon. And then as the story unfolds, though, they do eat of that tree. They take the tree of the knowledge of good and evil for themselves, and they do what Proverbs calls, they lean on their own understanding. They listen to their own hearts. They listen to their own appetites. They listen to what sounds to them like wisdom. It's actually a serpent who has said something that sounded wise, but it's actually deceptive. And as a result, they introduce something into the earth that God gave them that does not fit with the structure by which God made the earth and them to flourish. Now, that's a great definition of sin. Sin is just us choosing to fill the world with things that don't fit the way God made the world to work. So remember our definition of flourish? To grow or develop in a healthy and vigorous way, especially as the result of a particularly favorable environment. Sin introduces things into the environment which don't make for flourishing. Does that explain the world we live in? Human beings are prone to introducing things into the world. I just personalize it. I tend to introduce things into the world that don't make for flourishing. We introduce pride, ego, falsehood, and lies. Do we have any recent examples of that? Greed, exaggerated unrighteous anger, lust, adultery, sexual exploitation, racism, philosophies and ideas that are out of tune with God's wisdom and design, false religion that misrepresents God, hatred, murder. And when we unleash that into the world, which we do by not receiving the wisdom of God, when we release that into the world, death and destruction happens. So the story goes like this. God has a plan to take hold of this earth again, just like he did in the beginning when it was without form and void. And his plan is to take hold of it again and to reform it. And he's going to reform it by cleansing it of the stuff that we've filled it with that is not conducive to life. And he's going to cleanse it of us if we are not in tune with him and with the way he made the world work. And he's doing that not just because he's cranky and upset and has to get some satisfaction, has to discharge a little anger. He's doing that because he loves this world he made. and he wants to make it hospitable to flourishing again. When you get to the very end of the story in Revelation chapter 21, here's like the end of the story. Listen to how it's described. It's described as God remaking the whole creation, and in the middle of this creation, he sets a great city, and from this city, this whole new creation is going to be governed. Here's how Revelation 21 describes it, verse 23 and following. And the city, this great city at the center that's governing this new creation, the city has no need of sun or moon to shine on it, for the glory of God gives it light, and its lamp is the Lamb. So the things that sun and moon signified have now become present in this new city. So we don't even need sun or moon anymore. By its light, the nations walk, and the kings of the earth will bring their glory into it, and the gates of the city will never be shut by day, and there will be no night there. They will bring into it the glory and the honor of the nations. But nothing unclean will ever enter it, nor anyone who does what is detestable or false, but only those who are written in the Lamb's book of life. God is going to create a world where nothing that destroys life will ever be introduced into it again. And the question is, how do you get in on that story? And you heard Revelation talking about the Lamb. That's a nickname for Jesus. It's particularly a nickname for his being slain, his being sacrificed, his being slaughtered. You need to hear this. There is no way back to total flourishing without coming back to God. And the way back to God is through Jesus. So it's not enough, even though we love to talk about how can we make the world flourish? How can we make the world a more just place? How can we create environments where people can thrive? Those are great questions. We should be concerned about that. That's what God made us to be concerned about. But because sin is part now of each one of our stories and part of our collective human story, there's no way back to total flourishing without that being dealt with, and the way that's dealt with is through what Revelation called the Lamb, through Jesus. Now, here's how he deals with it. First of all, his death reconciles us to God, and his death absorbs the judgment that is necessary for God to put the world to right. Then, having reconciled us to God, he does that first. He doesn't say, like, now I'm going to wait and see how you do, how you perform, and if you perform well enough, I'll introduce you to my Father. I'll take you home to Dad. He says, I'm going to actually connect you to my Father, and now you're going to be in unbroken fellowship with him, and New Testament calls that justification. And then Jesus begins to retrain us. He calls that discipling us. He begins to retrain us in the structure of the world and in God's wisdom by which he made the world to work. And that's not all, because he was raised from the dead to a new kind of life and a new kind of body that can never die again. And he promises, I'm going to do that for you too, and I'm going to connect you into a new human community called my people, the church. And within this environment, reconciled to your Father in heaven, retrained and discipled into the way he made the world to work. With the hope of being raised from the dead in a new community, you'll flourish. Let's pray. Father, thank you that you created this world as a place for us to flourish. Thank you that even its structure today shows us your goodness. It shows us how much you care for us. It shows us your gift to us. And we also see it clearly, even more clearly, in the gift of your Son, who reconciles us to you and brings us back under your loving care so that we too can flourish along with the whole world we made. That's what we celebrate every Sunday, every Sabbath day, when we take time, just like you took time, we take time to simply stop from our work and to enjoy what you've done. So would you help us now as we sing? Would you help us to enter into enjoyment of what you've done? And as we take the Lord's Supper, would you help us to enter into enjoyment of what Jesus has done? As we give our tithes and offerings, would you help us to give them out of hearts that enjoy? As we go our separate ways to lunch, would you help us receive our food with glad and generous hearts, enjoying what you've done? As we watch large, fast, athletic men bang into each other and toss around a ball, would you help us be amazed? Would you help us be amazed at the ingenuity of man, which is a reflection, a dim reflection of your image? And would you help us to enjoy what you have done? We give you thanks that we're part of the story of what you did in creating and redeeming the world through Jesus. It's in his name we pray. Amen.